Mr. President, this is a bill designed to promote fiscal responsibility in school boards by letting them manage the money they have. We've created school boards as independent bodies. Their decisions cannot be overturned by city councils or boards of supervisors. The overwhelming majority of students in Virginia attend schools in districts where the members are elected. These school boards are directly accountable to the public, to the voters. Last year, we took action not to provide all the funding to VRS that was called for. At the insistence of the Senate, we specified that the money would be repaid with interest over a 10-year period. That decision affected not only us and our responsibility for state employees, but also local school systems because teachers are included in the VRS system. One of the jurisdictions that I represent, there were some of the school board members who came to me and said, well, can we go ahead and pay that money during this biennium? We'd rather do it now than wait and pay it back over 10 years with interest. I looked into that option and unfortunately found out that that could not be done because the VRS system for teachers is across all school systems because teachers move from one school system to another, and also because VRS wasn't sure how they would recalculate the differential payment for that particular jurisdiction should they do so compared to others in the future. And so VRS said that there was no way to be able to do that, and that school system could not pay the monies into the VRS system that otherwise would have been paid and receive benefits over the following 10-year period. Because of what we did, a number of school systems set aside some or all of the monies that they would have paid into the VRS system. For exercising this fiscal responsibility and attempting to plan for the future, some school systems then had local governments step in and take portion of at least some of those monies back. The school systems and their students have been penalized for being prudent, for being good fiscal stewards. The message being sent to these school divisions is don't exercise fiscal responsibility, don't plan and set aside monies for the future expenditures, spend everything you have, even if it isn't the best use of monies, because if you don't spend it now, you can lose it. We should not be sending that message. We should promote and encourage fiscal responsibility. We should give school boards the assurance that as independent, largely elected bodies, they have the responsibility to manage the school systems and to do so wisely. There are some who say that school divisions should not be able to keep school funds because they do not have taxing authority. However, if we do not trust them with saving money for future needs, how can we trust them with any spending? Should we not then make their budgets and spending subject to approval by the city councils and boards of supervisors who do have that taxing authority? This halfway approach of saying you can spend the money you have any way you want, but you can't keep the money or set it aside for future obligations is illogical. Finally, there are those who point out that many school boards and local governments reach amicable agreements regarding what to do with unspent funds. This measure would in no way prohibit that. In fact, it would encourage the two to reach mutually acceptable agreements rather than having one party, the city council or board of supervisors, in a position to dictate terms because of the ability to unilaterally take money away from the school division. I hope it would be the pleasure of the body to approve this fiscally responsible measure.
Thank you, Senator. Senator from James City County, Senator Norman.
Mr. President, would the gentleman resume the floor for purposes of a question or perhaps two?
Will the Senator from Southern Fairfax yield for a question or perhaps two?
Yes, Mr. President, I'd be happy to do so.
Senator from James City County, Senator Norman.
Mr. President, as I was listening to the eloquence of the Senator as he explains Senate Bill 1031, I was particularly taken by your reference to the VRS. Am I correct in reading this bill that VRS is only by way of example to a number of options that might be available for the use of those unexpended funds?
Senator from Southern Fairfax, Senator Barker.
Yes, Mr. President, I would say the gentleman is correct. It is certainly only one of the options. It was certainly a situation that we faced in our jurisdiction.
Mr. President, if the gentleman would yield for a further question.
Senator yield.
I'd be happy to yield.
Senator yield. Senator from James City County, Senator Norman.
Mr. President, my question would be if, in fact, those funds that have been appropriated by either state or local body are not expended, that under the terms of your bill, the school board would have unbridled discretion as to how to spend those funds within their budgetary process.
Senator from Southern Fairfax, Senator Barker.
Mr. President, I would point out that right now the school boards have unbridled opportunity to make the decisions as to how to spend the money within the fiscal year. What this would do is allow them to save some of that money, particularly when they are faced with situations where there are future expenditures that are anticipated.
Senator from James City County, Senator Norman.
Mr. President, I would say I'm appreciative of the answer, but I don't believe it was responsive to my question. I will ask my question again, perhaps more clearly this time. My question, Mr. President, was if under the provisions of this bill there are unexpended funds, does the school board have the unbridled discretion to spend it any way they deem appropriate within their budgetary process?
Senator from Southern Fairfax, Senator Barker.
Mr. President, I thought I did answer the gentleman's question, but I would say categorically that what this bill would do was allow them to keep the monies that are unspent to be used at some future time and however they would determine is in the best interest of the school system and the students that they serve.
Senator from James City County, Senator Norman.
Mr. President, if in fact, next question, please, Mr. President.
Senator has the floor.
If in fact the local government's appropriated funds pursuant to a presented school board budget that included maintenance issues, but that the school board made a discretionary decision to defer the maintenance to another budgetary cycle, would in fact they be able to retain those unexpended funds that the locality appropriated with the understanding it would be used for maintenance?
Senator from Southern Fairfax, Senator Barker.
Mr. President, I would say that they would not have that guarantee currently, but under this bill they would have that ability to be able to defer some of these maintenance expenditures if it were deemed by the school board to be the most fiscally prudent process to take.
Senator from James City County, Senator Norman.
I thank the gentleman speaking to the bill.
Senator has the floor.
Mr. President and ladies and gentlemen of the Senate, while I was not here when the initiative started, there are those of you who were here that went through multiple years of the offering of going to elected school boards. And I can't recall whether it was 9 or 13 years before it took itself to meander through the legislative process before ultimately this body and the House of Delegates went to elected school boards. At the time that the bill was passed, there was an outstanding Virginian who I think is one of the finest legislators that I ever had the privilege of serving with, and that was the honorable gentleman from Hampton, Virginia, Hunter B. Andrews. And I recall that Hunter Andrews sat exactly where Senator Stosh sits, and I recall very vividly him standing up and extending an admonition to this body that you need to understand when you create elected school boards that you are creating a bifurcated process, that the elected school boards will propose a needs-based budget, but they are still dependent upon the local governing authorities or the state to fund the budget. And further, Senator Andrews said, do not do this unless you're going to give fiscal autonomy to the school boards. That General Assembly and every subsequent General Assembly has made the determination that we are not going in that direction. And I suggest, Mr. President, I know you had the opportunity to serve in local government. Consequently, you had the opportunity to be confronted with a budget from the school board and then to make a determination what, in fact, your locality's Board of Supervisors or City Councils thought was appropriate to fund the schools, irrespective of what that budget presented by the school board may be. The natural consequence is that there's always tension between the two bodies. Mr. President, I further asked a question specifically about maintenance and maintenance reserves because I recall very vividly when I was in local government going over a school board budget that included significant dollars for maintenance reserves, and then the decision was made after the funds were appropriated to defer using any of that maintenance money, and with a request back to the local government that we would like to sweep those funds to use them for other worthy educational needs. The point being, Mr. President, I think that the system currently works. There are tensions throughout the Commonwealth between school boards and the governing authorities, and I think if in fact there are unexpended balances, it is nice to, I think, have the Pollyanna approach that it will encourage amicable discussions, but I think a safeguard is that the school board needs to continue the current practice of having to deal with the local governing authorities, because it is the local governing authorities that impose the tax on the people. They are the guardians of those dollars, and they are the stewards of those dollars, and they, in fact, are the ones that have to answer for it. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator. Senator from Southern Fairfax, Senator Barker.
Mr. President, if I might sort of attempt to close here on this situation. In the situation where there is a school board budget that is presented to a locality, a board of supervisors or city council, that as an example has a line item in there for maintenance reserves or for maintenance expenditures, once that budget is approved and the funding is, or once the funding is provided by the locality, the school board makes the decision as to how to spend those money during that fiscal year. The school board right now can, and under this bill certainly would be able to continue in making a decision as to whether to keep with that planned expenditure or to change that planned expenditure and use those monies for other things. What is prohibited now is the ability of the school board to make the decision to decide that it's fiscally prudent to, in effect, delay some of those maintenance expenditures, that we can maintain buildings or other types of systems for a period of time, to save those monies, because they don't know whether they would be able to keep the monies and, in fact, save the taxpayers' funding in the long run. This is a fiscally responsible measure, and I'd hope it would be the pleasure of the body to approve it.
Thank you, Senator. The question is, shall the bill pass? The Senator from Powhatan, Senator Watkins.
President, would the gentleman yield for a further question?
Will the Senator from Southern Fairfax yield for a question?
Yes, I'd be happy to yield.
Senator yields. Senator from Powhatan, Senator Watkins.
Mr. President, I'd ask the gentleman, in Section 22.1-94 of the Code of Virginia, it lays out the methodology for which school boards are allocated funds from local governments. And it is my understanding that the State Board of Education sets up individual classifications with regard to how those funds are allocated. From the conversation that I have heard and from your description of this legislation, I would have to assume that you have couched this legislation in such a way that the school board could change funds allocated within those specific categories if they were funds that were carried over from one year to the next. Is that correct?
Senator from Southern Fairfax, Senator Barker.
Mr. Chair, what this would do is in effect, it would state that they could carry funds over from one year to the next. It does not address the issue of exactly how those funds would be spent. It would be a decision of the school board to make the determination as to how best to spend the funds in the future.
Further question then, Mr. President.
Senator yield for an additional question?
Yes, I'd be happy to yield.
Senator yield. Senator from Powhatan, Senator Watkins.
Mr. President, I think that's exactly the point that I wish to drill down on. If they are going to make the decision, do you think that it is appropriate that they forego the decision of the governing body which raised the revenue and change the allocation of the funds simply because they held them over from one year to another?
Senator from Southern Fairfax, Senator Barker.
Mr. President, I would respond that I think that it is the responsibility of the school board to make the decisions as to what the best expenditure of the funds, what is in the best interest of the students of that system, and to be able to use that funds with flexibility.
Thanks. Senator from Powhatan, Senator Watkins.
Mr. President, just speaking to the bill, if I
Senator
could.
has the floor.
Mr. President, ladies and gentlemen of the Senate, I'm not typically one that gets involved in discussions with regard to education funding. I do not sit on any of the committees that oversee that. But one of the issues that has come up over and over and over again within some of my local governments is the concern that is expressed by the members of the city councils and the boards of supervisors with regard to making sure that they appropriately allocate the funds that are directed to them from the Commonwealth of Virginia and the local funds that are raised as a result of property taxes. There are only 5 or 6 categories in which they can allocate those funds, and that's how counties and cities control, if you would, the prioritization of that funding. And that's not a very vivid breakdown with regard to being very specific. They're pretty broad categories. But the State Board of Education sets those categories up for everyone. And I would say to you, this legislation is going to circumvent the deliberations and the decisions of the State Board of Education with regard to keeping that money in those categories. There's always this rift, if you would, between local government and school boards in terms of how they spend their money. I had a situation in one of my jurisdictions last year when they were dealing with the VRS, that the local governing body decided to shift the contributions for VRS to the employees, the new employees hired after July 1. They made that change. The school board didn't. The school board decided to go another direction. And so now they're mad at us here in the state government because we didn't mandate it. And then they come back and tell us we're putting too many mandates on them. But this circumvents the ability of the local governments to say to school boards, here are your priorities. There are only 5 or 6 categories that they can put it in. And if they hold the money over, or if they just put the money to the side, they wait to the end of the fiscal year, then they spend it any way they want to. I don't think that that's good governance. And I would hope that we would defeat the bill.
Thank you, Senator. Question is, shall the bill pass? All in favor of the motion will record their votes aye. Those opposed, no. Are the senators ready to vote? Have all the senators voted? Do any senators desire to change their votes? The clerk will close the roll.
Ayes 18, noes 22.
Ayes 18, noes 22. The bill fails to pass.
Senate Bill 1042, a bill to amend and reenact 46.2-1078.1 of the Code of Virginia relating to use of handheld personal communication devices while driving.
Senator from Southern Fairfax, Senator Barker.
Mr. President, I move the bill